Hi, welcome to Vector Speech Tutorials. This is Extemp 101, Organization and Structure. Today we're going to take a look at how you should organize your Extemp speech and how to structure your points, as well as take a look at a few examples of both of these. First, let's take a look at how you should structure your Extemp speeches. Now, before we get into this, it's worth noting that as you get more experience with Extemp, you'll find ways to tweak this method and also ways to organize your speech that best suit your speaking style. But this is a good starting point. So first, you're going to want to start your speech with an introduction. This could be anything from a story to a quote or a personal anecdote. Anything that ties your life and integrates the speech with something that interests the judge. From there, you're going to want to transition from your introduction to your question, the prompt you've been given. You want to state it clearly for the judge so they know what the topic of the speech is, and then secondly, you're going to want to answer that question. Now, some people have asked me, shouldn't I answer the question at the end of the speech once I've presented all my reasoning and evidence? And the answer is no, because if you answer your question at the end of the speech, you'll leave your judges to try to figure out what's going on, and they're not going to be able to pay as much attention to your reasoning and logic. The next thing you're going to add in your speech is an outline. In Extemp, we call this the roadmap. The roadmap is simply an outline of your speech so that your judges know what points you're going to talk on, and so that they can follow you within your speech knowing what to expect next. This is extremely important and will massively help your structure and organization. Now, the next part is something that you won't have in every speech, and that's a background point. Some topics or prompts are incredibly specific or technical, something that a lot of people might not know about. In these cases, it's important to provide the judges with additional background information. Your background point won't be making any sort of argument, but it is providing the judges with basic understanding of the topic at hand so that they can understand the further arguments you'll make later in your speech. Now that you've taken care of all of the trimmings, you can get into the meat of your speech, your body points. Your body points are simply just the arguments that you've come up with in response to the prompt you've been given. Now, many people think that the magic number with points is 3. And oftentimes, yes, 3 points takes up about the amount of time that you'll have to bring up your arguments. However, some topics require a little bit more divulsion into the actual arguments themselves, so you may find that 3 points is not always appropriate for the amount of time you've been given. But however many points you have, make sure that your body points are well thought out and well reasoned. Don't try to rush yourself and don't try to drag them out. Whatever information you have, simply state it and move on. And then to finish, you're going to want to bring in your conclusion. Your conclusion is the final part of your speech, the coup de grace, if you will. It will wrap everything you've brought up so far into a nice, neat bow. It simplifies the points you've made and helps the judge understand what the key points of your speech are. Now, it's worth noting that a conclusion is not simply just a restatement of the points you've made. It should be summary. It should take a look at the major points of your speech and outline the reasons why you believe what you do. Now, we've talked about the hypothetical structure that a hypothetical Extemp speech might have, but let's tie it to an actual example so that it's easier to understand. Say I'm in prep time and I've been given the prompt, should the United States federal government encourage dog ownership? Now, to start my speech, I would start with a story or a quote. Say I started with the story, I have a dog and I love dogs. That could be how I tie my Extemp speech into the actual prompt, should the United States federal government encourage dog ownership? After that, I would want to include the question, the prompt I've been given, so that the judges understand what the topic is, and then I would clearly state my answer to that question, which for the purposes of this example will be yes. Next, I would want to make sure that my judges understand the basic outline of my speech. So this is where I would insert my roadmap. I might tell them there's 3 specific characteristics of dog ownership that make it such a good idea, and they are point 1, point 2, and point 3. Now I'll be getting into these later on in my speech. So as you can see, I haven't actually told them what my points are, but they have an idea of what to look for. This way they're not lost and they know exactly where they are within my speech later on when I actually go into those points. Now, next, in case this topic was something extremely complicated or very technical, I would need to bring up a point of background information. Now, as you've probably guessed, dog ownership isn't the most technical of subjects, but for the sake of this example, let's say that dog ownership was something that just wasn't understood in the United States. I might need to go into, in my background information, what the definition of dog ownership is, and some of the characteristics that it entails. This would be my background information that might provide my judges with the necessary understanding to be able to understand and be persuaded by the points I'll make later on in my speech. Now I'm ready to get into the real part of my speech. So I would spend the next 3 to 4 minutes telling the judges my 3 key characteristics of dog ownership that make it such a good idea. I might talk about how pretty dogs are, or how good they make you feel, or how they're cheaper compared to a lot of other pets like alligators and rhinoceroses. But whatever my points, I need to spend a considerable amount of time here because this is the meat of my speech. This is what's going to make the difference between a first place Extemp speaker and a 5th and below. Now that I'm finished with those body points, I want to get into my conclusion, wrap up my speech. I might go over some of the key points I made in the speech and say something like, now that we've examined the preponderance of these examples, it's clear that this action needs to be taken. It is clear that the United States federal government should indeed encourage dog ownership. Now that we've taken a look at how you should structure and organize your Extemp speech, let's take a look at how you should structure and organize your points, because arguments are something that should not be oversimplified. There are 4 key parts of every argument, and this is how you should structure the arguments you make within your Extemp speech. The first part is the tag. A tag is just a short title, something that you can refer to the point back to by. So if I was talking about the prettiness of dogs, I might tag it as "dogs are pretty." This is something simple, short, and easily remembered that I can reference later in my speech without confusing the judges. Now that I've tagged my speech, I might need to take a look at some support. Now this in Extemp is typically some sort of evidentiary. I need to bring up some sort of statistic, study, or news source that says a piece of information that proves the assertion I made true. After this, I might want to bring up my reasoning, show why the evidence that I brought up supports my previous claim, how this study makes this claim true. And then finally, I need to link and impact those arguments. I need to show that this argument that I've just made is important and show why it matters to the topic at hand. So now that, again, we've taken a look at the hypothetical structure of a point, let's actually tie it down to a specific example. Say I brought up a point about dog ownership, saying that it reduces societal stress. I might start this point by saying, my first point is reducing societal stress. That would be my tag. That's something I can refer back to and the judges will know what I'm talking about. Next, I would need to bring in my information, the studies or research that I performed in prep time. I might bring up a study that says that 38% of the population in the United States is single adults living alone, and I need to cite that, so I might say that's the US Census Bureau. I might again bring up more information saying that the Pennsylvania University studies found that single adults living alone were 64% less likely to commit an act of stress-induced violence if they owned at least one dog. And the study also found that dogs were on average at least 2 times more effective at reducing stress than cats. So now that I've tagged my argument and I've brought up the important information that's relevant to it, I need to tie that all together with my reasoning and analysis. So I might say something like, it's clear from these pieces of information that encouraging dog ownership would mean that a greater percentage of our population would have reduced stress. And then I'd need to impact that reasoning. So this is the 4th point, the impact and the link. I could say that a lower average stress level would promote productivity, also public safety, and a greater level of societal contentment. From here you can see that a well-structured point will actually make the difference between the judge understanding your reasoning and being confused by it. Thanks for watching. This has been Vector Speech Tutorials, Extemp 101, Organization and Structure. Make sure you check out some of our other videos to learn more about the basics of speech.